It is already so fucking hot.
Turn my brightness down. Alrighty, testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Good there. Go to YouTube. Yeah, we're good.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode 188 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are previewing the 2025 Esports World Cup, which begins this coming week in Saudi Arabia. We have 16 teams competing in the Call of Duty portion of EWC. So we'll break all of that down, give our predictions. And it also has a different twist, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Doing all right. Yeah, feels like, a bit of a weird timing, as we've talked about and, highlighted throughout the year with this Esports World Cup and the schedule and whatnot. But we're finally at that point of the last tournament of the 2025 Pro COD season. Should be the last Black Ops 6 tournament, barring like any fan tournaments or something that happens before the next game is released. So, yeah, should be some good last matches to, break down and all that stuff. Feels weird though, because, this is kind of how I felt last year with the Esports World Cup. Is it's just after champs, and the money's there, but it just feels like it's in a weird spot because it's after champs. But it's a tournament, and we're here to cover it.
I saw that, I didn't put this in the notes, but I don't know if you saw it as well. Scrap was talking about the importance of EWC, and he said last year, I think he said that he didn't take it seriously because it was just kind of like a novelty, essentially, like going to Saudi Arabia after the season, and he wasn't really focused on it. But this year, it's like almost as big as champs. I think that is cap, so to speak. I think when you have a really disappointing end to your season at champs, then of course EWC seems a lot more important than it did a year ago. Just me personally, that's how I would view that kind of attitude. But regardless, I do think EWC is an interesting event. I don't know how it compares to champs, and we've talked about this kind of topic before, because champs is really what the CDL season is building up to, and that is the climax of the year. But then you have a month later another tournament which has just as much or around as much money involved, and just no prestige really tied to that. So it's interesting to see how the teams and the players will prepare for this and how seriously they'll take it. We saw some interesting results last year. There was also, and I think even Scrap said this, was the only reason that FaZe stuck together after last season and the disappointing champs performance was because then they went to EWC and they won that event, and then they rolled back with the same roster this year. So maybe that something like that could happen this season. Even Scrap's team, LAT, obviously had a really poor finish to the season at champs. Maybe a great performance winning EWC could change their fortunes, or change maybe the plans going into the off season, even though the off season is technically begun, because we already seen a bunch of roster changes and everything. But we'll get to all of that. I do think we have to start with at least the really the only big news that has come out over the last week or so, last 2 weeks since we did our last show, is this coaching. I would say it's controversy, because there are people that have really, really strong opinions about this. But at EWC, this week for Black Ops 6, coaches will be allowed on stage to provide real-time coaching to their teams during hardpoint and control. And for S&D, coaches will only be allowed to talk to their team in between rounds. So, the 25, 30 seconds in between rounds, when you get the kill cam and all of that stuff. That was announced by EWC on, I believe it was Thursday, July 17th. There were some really very strong reactions to this. Probably the strongest coming from Octane, former world champion, one of the greatest assault rifle players, one of the better, one of the greatest Call of Duty players of all time. He tweeted, "I'm praying coaches on stage is an EWC only thing, and the CDL doesn't adapt this moving forward. The only real skill gap remaining in COD is the player's ability to make split-second decisions and understand the game. Anything to reduce that further is awful for our esport." And Methods, obviously a former COD pro as well. Coincidentally, I guess, Octane's teammate on the very infamous Optic gaming roster. But Methods tweet pretty much the same exact thing. Said communication is one of the few skill gaps we have these days. Your poor communication should penalize you, not be saved by a coach on stage. I personally, granted, I had not really thought about on-stage coaching in years because it hasn't been a thing basically since even the CWL got involved and Activision stepped in. It was more a relic of, the UMG events, some of the MLG events, pre like 2015, 2016. Yeah. That's when on-stage coaching basically went extinct, and we haven't seen it since then. Of course, that's the time that I started, coming up in competitive Call of Duty. So I got used to the onstage coaching. Mr. X obviously is probably the best onstage coach of all time, just by win record. There's, a bunch of others that probably deserve some praise. The only one that I can really think of off the top of my head is Hilton for some reason. I think it's because he had the weird outfits and all that. But so it hasn't been a thing in nearly a decade, maybe a decade actually. What do you think about this change? Yet, let's just assume that it is an EWC only thing for now.
Yeah. So that's how I really, you kind of just summarized my exact thought process with this news and my immediate gut reaction to after it announced. I was pretty pumped, and I was thinking about all those moments with Mr. X and Hilton and the guys you just mentioned, and I was really thinking about it simply from a trash talk perspective, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about it from a communication standpoint, as a lot of the Octane methods like you highlighted, but my gut reaction is just because, like you said, the only real sample we have of coaches on stage was in an era where some people even called Mr. X the best cheerleader and made jokes about that because he was literally just on stage for the Cole Dynasty team, and there's the videos of him talking trash to Clay when Clay went to TK and stuff like that. He wasn't calling out spawns and stuff like that. Maybe he did occasionally, but from everything we really saw and that I remember, the iconic moments for sure, Hilton and him, as you mentioned, they're talking trash. And I think that, obviously a lot has changed over the years since we last saw coaches on stage in Call of Duty. And like you mentioned, there's a good chance that a majority of fans watching EWC possibly never have seen a competitive Call of Duty match with a coach on stage during the match. It's very possible just because of how long ago it happened. So gut reaction, I was really excited for this news as, the tweets started coming in and the community started reacting. I do sort of agree with, at least from, very basic standpoint that coaches today could definitely offer more than potentially was being offered the last time coaches were allowed on stage. Just because the game has evolved and the way players even communicate and strategize and everything has evolved so much since then. So that is definitely something to consider. And at the end of the day, I do think and hope that this is, at least for now, just an EWC only thing. And I don't hate that it's being allowed to be quote unquote tested at EWC, if that is even what is being happened, if that is even what's happening. There's a chance this is just an EWC thing and the CDL isn't even considering implementing this next year, but we obviously don't know for sure. If there is some sort of, hey, let's try this out at EWC and test it for next year. I don't know how I feel about that. Um, but just for a one-off event, like I got no problem with it being on stage. Hopefully we get some hype moments out of it. It will be interesting to see, and I think that'll probably be a decent chunk of our post-event coverage. Will be like, if we get listens and stuff, breaking that down and seeing how it sounds with, actively another voice in the communications for like respawns and stuff like that. Um, I will say too, I kind of skipped over it, but I am glad that like S&D, the coaches aren't in there during the rounds. I think that would be a little cheesy. So, mid-round strats and whatnot, I guess that's fine. That's kind of like Counter-Strike, even though I think Counter-Strike only does like the coaches talk during timeouts during the matches, if I remember correctly. Um, so not necessarily the same thing, but I do think if the coaches were just allowed to talk the entire time during an S&D map, that would be a little strange. But yeah, I'm excited to see what it results in. I'm pretty open minded in terms of like I'm not like raising a pitchfork and torch here and getting super angry over this, but I'm not that admittedly as excited as I was when the news first dropped because of the concerns and everything that people in the community have brought up. So it's going to be a wait and see game for me. We'll see what comes of this as a result of EWC and if it does have any implications on the future of competitive COD. But as you mentioned, and as I said at the beginning, I can't help but feel nostalgic with this. And I think in my mind, I kind of, I could see it sort of being, this is not even remotely on the same playing field in terms of importance, but last year at Champs, there was, they did the setup where they had the teams facing each other, and we got those moments of like the trash talk and the players yelling across directly in front of them, like standing up as opposed to being side by side. And that was implemented in multiple events this year for setups. So that's obviously not as big of a deal as coaching, but that's an example of an event at the end of last year having an influence on the following season's like setup and whatnot. So it's possible that EWC coaching like this could translate into next season. It's also very possible that this is not related to any CDL thinking or anything like that, and it's just going to be an Esports World Cup thing, and maybe we get some cool moments of it, and then we don't think about it again for another 12 months till EWC next year. So, yeah, I am excited though. Hopefully, we get some, Crowder versus Rambo Ray just yelling matches. That'd be funny.
I think it's worth a shot. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
I just I again, like I said, I didn't really have an opinion about this because it's been so long and I really haven't thought about on-stage coaching in that way. I've gotten used to like what the idea of coaching is now, which is a general manager who does have some post-game influence or in-between game influence on strategies or advice, stuff like that. Like, when guys go to the back, then they talk with their coaches and, they're trying to balance what they just did versus what they're about to do, which is unlike how coaches work in traditional sports mostly. I guess you could say like a tennis coach, for example, is like in the stands and they are not like, in the nitty gritty of every single point, every single match. So maybe it's something like that. But other traditional sports, like in basketball, for example, like the way, obviously they can't go like onto the court, legally, I guess. But coaches will be so intense and so locked in that they'll be calling out defensive rotations. They'll be instructing plays to be run on offense every possession, which is probably something like a player like Octane or Methods, they don't want to happen. They don't want coaches to be able to kind of dictate the pace and help these players kind of find their way through some of these maps, especially I guess in Search and Destroy, it would be probably the biggest, Hardpoint, like just in terms of rotations, but those games can move so quickly. Sometimes I think, I just don't know how much the coaches will come into place. S&D would have like a massive effect. Even in Counter-Strike, they don't allow coaches to be on stage, I believe, during the maps. It's in between the maps they come in and they have a chat. So I think it's interesting. It is worth a shot, in my opinion. I did see some positive or more optimistic views on this. So Marky B, obviously a longtime coach, former player as well, he replied to Methods and said, you can also look at it like a good coach is going to increase the skill gap. And I believe Octane's tweet, Parasite, a former COD pro as well, he said, raises the ceiling for all teams, though, no. Coaching more valuable. Also, if you call something less skilled, then everyone should be better or equal, which drives more entertaining games. So I think there are, it's interesting. I don't know if it'll be better, if it'll be worse. I'm sure in some regards it will be better, and in some regards it will be worse. I don't know. I do think, and I was thinking about this when I saw the initial tweet, was wouldn't it have been great for a team like Minnesota earlier in the year when we talked so much about, well, they don't really have like this veteran leader on their team, this pre-Kenny. What if they had Looney in the game chat kind of helping lead them, but with the skill level of those 4 players that they had? I think that's a really interesting idea. The same thing with Vancouver. Vancouver has like all this talent, and I'm not saying they did poorly by any means. They literally went to Champs Grand Finals, but I sure would like Rambo Ray to be in the comms calling out, instructing players to rotate in between S&D rounds, calling out strats, fixing things on the fly. Tupac said in reply to Octane, he said, if they allowed this for S&D, my team going undefeated, which is a very good point. I don't know if there's you have to have your head coach as your designated on-stage coach, or if you could, a team could just be like, yeah, we're going to have Tupac for S&D come up on stage and basically just run strats for us every single round. So, it's going to be pretty intriguing. I think it's interesting that they didn't announce this before this week. Like they announced it, 7 days or so before the start of the event. I don't know if that was purposeful or if they had been talking about it and just finally decided to announce it. I'm not entirely sure, but it doesn't give a lot of these coaches time to prepare for something like that if they're not used to it, which I would assume most of them are not used to doing this, because I don't even think they do this in practice. I think they go to Codcaster and then they come in between maps or after the series to talk with their players. So, I'm all on board. We're going to see. And then this is probably what EWC should be in some way, is like an experimental ground for some of these things that, like you said with Champs last year and just the general setup of the seating and how the players are positioned in the arena. That was kind of like the blueprint for how a lot of these events worked this year. Maybe something like this or other in-game features might be of interest in trying to experiment with next year at EWC and, figure out what the best way to run Call of Duty events or matches is. So I'm interested. I know that there will be some players that are very not in favor of this, but for teams that have really good coaches, this could be a massive help to them at EWC. Another thing was Kleenex saying, this could be blown out of proportion, obviously, just because of the way he said it. But he basically said that this will be the last event that he's in a Toronto Ultra jersey. And so that made people think, is he leaving? What does that mean in general? The consensus seems to be, or the theory seems to be that he's not necessarily leaving the Ultra, which I don't think we can rule out that because he's literally been a restricted free agent for 2 or 3 seasons in a row. But it is that Toronto is reportedly, allegedly rebranding the Ultra into the KOI branding, which is, I believe it's a Spanish league. Isn't that Ibai? Is that how you say his name?
I believe so, yeah.
I think that's his brand, and it's under Overactive Media, if I'm not mistaken. That's what people have been saying on Twitter. Again, like, I have no idea, but that would seem pretty logical because it would be weird if they just announced in one of their Toronto Ultra videos that Kleenex is like not going to be here next year. I think that's a little bit weird, but what did you think? Obviously, you're a big fan of the tissue, so this would be of interest to you.
Yeah, that's what I didn't see any of the Koi rumors or anything about that. So I thought he says in the clip that Champs was he said some paraphrasing here, but it's basically like him and his family knew that Champs was going to be the last time wearing the Ultra jersey, and that just seemed off to me because obviously there's Esports World Cup, and I guess that makes sense because uh, getting a little ahead of ourselves here with Esports World Cup preview coverage, but I did notice that um, obviously last year the talk was that some CDL teams didn't go with their CDL brands to Esports World Cup. They just competed as, like instead of Optic Texas, Optic Gaming, instead of LA Thieves, it was 100 Thieves. But last year at the Esports World Cup, Toronto Ultra and Atlanta FaZe competed as their CDL brands. This year, based on what we've seen so far, they're going as FaZe Clan and Movie Star Koi. So I guess, maybe that's where that comes in, where Kleenex is saying he's not wearing the Toronto Ultra jersey at EWC, and that makes more sense to me now thinking
Mm-hmm.
about it. But I really was a little confused and thinking about it from the perspective of like, is this another sign of Toronto Ultra management like looking to potentially restructure its roster as we've seen them do
Yeah.
almost every year? Um, we've talked about it multiple times now where the organization seemingly allows the players to be restricted free agents and field offers, even guys like Kleenex and Insight who have been on the team for many years. But maybe it's a case we heard from Scrap last year that they basically, when it was Scrap, Envoy, Insight, and Kleenex, they went to Toronto management and were like, is there any way that um, our current team could compete together again on Toronto for this season 2025, and they were basically told no, like, financially it just doesn't make sense. Maybe this is another situation where Kleenex just has a feeling like he's not gonna he'll basically be told that there Toronto isn't going to be willing to pay whatever his salary is, or
Mm-hmm.
he'll only stay if he takes a pay cut or something like that. um So that's where my head went with this. I guess, obviously with the brand changes for Esports World Cup, it might not be as big of a deal as I was thinking. So might be jumping the gun a little bit. But regardless, it does get the wheels turning a little bit on what Toronto could look to do in the off season. They're already bringing in Abe for Esports World Cup. And Kleenex is moving to a flex. We broke that down and talked about, potentially what that means for Kleenex's stock going into the offseason. If he has a good tournament using an AR, you know, people can not only look at Kleenex as an SMG option, they could look at him as a flex option as well, and that could potentially open the door for more opportunities for him on multiple other teams and increases offers, etc. Um, and at the same time, from a Toronto perspective, again, we don't know the details of these contracts that players are signing for EWC, if it really is just a one tournament contract or if they've signed for, like, keep an eye on is like Joe Deceives. We mentioned him potentially as a player that Toronto would, if contract structures continue in the CDL the way that we've known them to previously with the 1+1 year, assuming Joe Deceives most likely isn't on a super expensive contract, it would financially make sense for Toronto to potentially do that +1 year of Joe Deceives. But in another world, he could get some buyout offers from other teams just because of how well he played. So interesting position for Toronto to be in multiple regards. Um, but I guess it is, at the very least, we will be seeing Kleenex in another jersey at EWC, which will be interesting because we literally haven't seen him in anything but a Toronto jersey since 2019.
That's a good point. I actually hadn't thought about that, but he's one of the very few players that have not changed teams since the CDL started. Like there's the three phase guys, him, um,
Insight wouldn't have either, but he obviously didn't
he joined later.
start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think that is it. Like I can't think of another because obviously there have been changes.
Shotzi and
Yeah, it was with Dallas and then
Dashy were on
Optic.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, that's pretty interesting. Obviously, he's deserved it. Like, it made no sense for Toronto to ever move off of him for
Yep.
the last 5 years or so. But like you said, like I said, it's Toronto has just been very open about it. And I think it's like a business strategy to just see what's out there. I think they got a pretty nice buyout for Scrap last year. So in terms of the financials, I think it probably worked out in their favor. On or in the lobby, it did not work out as well as they would like, because they finished third in the regular season, and then they go to champs and just don't have anything going for them, and have a really rough go of it. They go into EWC with I don't know, like I think they have a really easy group, all things considered. Like, if you're looking at a lot of these groups, I think, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, but I think Koi has a really good shot to get first place in their group and make a run at EWC. What that means for this roster, I don't think it means anything. I don't think if they get 16th, and I think if they get first, I don't really know if that will change the calculus for how Toronto or Overactive kind of treats this offseason. And we don't know the contracts. Maybe, maybe some of those guys are like, I'm out of here already. Like, I've already set up where I'm going to go next. And it doesn't matter what happens at EWC. So I guess we'll see what happens.
I gotta go through this real quick because I pulled up the 2020 CDL COD wiki page just because we were talking about it. It's we're gonna go through these rosters real quick, and these are the end of season rosters, I believe, but it's pretty crazy to think about. So obviously, like you said, Abizi, Simp, and Celium. Still with Atlanta FaZe. This was 5v5 for the first year, so they were teaming with Major Maniac and Priesta. Obviously, some of these names are players who are either like not on a roster for EWC, but were in the CDL just this past year, or we'll get to like Vivid and Mac. They were in the CDL, then they're on challengers teams, et cetera, et cetera. But then you got Dallas Empire, Clay, Shotzi, Illy, Hook, and Krim. So obviously Shotzi and Hook are still competing. So that's 5. Then you got Florida Mutineers is Havoc, Skies, Frosty, Pharaoh, Rip F3, and Awakening. If you don't count Skies, that's 6 with Awakening current CDL players at EWC. Chicago Huntsman is Scump, Formal, Arcides, Envoy, and Priesta. So that's 8 with Arcides and Envoy. New York Subliners, Zuma, Temp, Accuracy, Attach, and Mac. None of them, Mac is competing, but not on a CDL team. Royal Ravens, Wuskin, Scrap, Dylan, Shawnee, and Zero. Shawnee's coaching, but not, competing. Then you got Toronto Ultra, Methods, Cammy, Bance, Kleenex, and Classic. They had the 10-man roster, so some of the other guys on the bench are there. So that's Cammy and Kleenex is 2 more seconds. That's 10. Minnesota Rocker, Silly, Assault, GodRx, ASIM, and Alex. Assault's competing, but not on the CDL roster. Optic LA, hilarious. TJ, Kenny, Slasher, Hollow, and Draza. Hollow, there's a throwback there. So this is getting a little longer than I thought, but basically, and then these last few teams, Paris Legion, Seattle Surge, and LA Gorillas. Vivid was on the LAG team, but like basically almost all of these players aren't competing anymore, which actually Paris Legion had Kismet, but the Australian guys and Zed moved to coaching, and then Seattle Surge, none of those guys are still competing. So it's pretty crazy to look back on that. But I do think, based on that list, it would just be Abizi, Simp, Celium, and Kleenex as the only players who have competed since the first season on the same team. Like we said, Insight has only played for Toronto, but obviously wasn't a part of that initial CDL team.
And there's a really decent chance, I don't know if it's a likely chance, but there's a decent chance that no players after this offseason will be on there. I'm just saying.
I'm not gonna go that far. I wouldn't say there's a decent chance. There's a possibility.
Hey, Team Falcons is looming.
There's a decent chance that number will decrease from 4. I'd say that.
Yeah. But we'll get to that. Shotzi versus Simp. This was something that we didn't talk about on the last episode, but I thought it was interesting because obviously now Shotzi has multiple rings. or 3 rings, excuse me. Simp, who, I think I made very clear in just like the 4 years or however long we've been doing this podcast that he's one of the best Call of Duty players of all time, regardless of championship rings. But that is the debate, or that was the debate a few weeks ago, especially post champs, was now that Shotzi's got 3, he might not be a superstar in some people's eyes, but he's one of 5 players or something like that with 3 rings now, maybe 4 players, and back-to-back champs hadn't been done as far as like a team doing it. So it's historic in that vein. And Simp, on the other hand, has been awesome, been multiple-time MVP in the CDL, former champs MVP, won champs his rookie year, won champs in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So he has all of these accolades, but with that additional champs ring, some will say that Shotzi is better in terms of the all-time list. I'd like to get your thoughts on this before I give mine, if you could do that.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a interesting conversation that comes more interesting if you keep it in the confines of only the CDL, because obviously that hurts Simp in the sense of not having technically 2 CDL champs wins.
Yeah.
He would only have 1 CDL champs wins to Shotzi's 3. So I think in that sense it favors Shotzi a little bit. Just I can't be a hypocrite. Rings and championships mean the most to me from a sports fan perspective, and that carries over into my thoughts and how I look at esports and all that too. So I still think personally I would favor Simp over Shotzi if I had to pick one. But the Shotzi having 3 rings in the CDL era, that definitely makes it a lot closer than it would have otherwise been, in my opinion. I do think there was in the replies too, like looking at MVPs. I think Simp has the MVPs for not only season MVPs but also tournament MVPs. I believe he has an advantage that wasn't included in the breaking point graphic. But more event wins, 10 more grand finals appearances, which is crazy. A better average placing, and just a better series win-loss record for Simp. So really the only thing Shotzi has is the 3 rings to Simp's 1. And if you wanted to pick Shotzi for that reason, I couldn't fault it, because again, I have that mindset for a lot of other debates, but it's also a weird thing because these are 2 players, it's not like MJ or LeBron or something where they're playing in different eras. They're playing against each other, and they're both not done yet. And it's very possible that this conversation doesn't mean anything because the championships and the number of rings and et cetera could look very different when all is said and done for both of these guys.
Yeah, I think it's Simp. I don't think it. Not say it's like particularly close, but I don't have to really think too hard about this. I mean, I'm sure people would disagree with me. I think in general, like I think a part of it, of course, is if these 2 teams were on the opposite team, if these 2 players were on opposite teams, and Simp was a optic lifer and Shotzi was an optic phase guy, I think the conversation would be a little bit different. I would just say that. As far as Simp goes, I think he's kind of in the Scump territory of like, if you want to bring up the rings conversation, it's going to be really, really tough on you because he's pretty much like, he doesn't have as many rings as other guys, but like he's so clearly better than most of the guys in the history of Call of Duty. I'd like to see what people think about that, like Shotzi versus Scump, for example, because like,
Yeah.
because then the team bias doesn't come into it as nearly as much. But Shotzi has 3 times as many champs rings in way less time. Like Scump competed at the first COD champs in 2013. His last champs would have been 2022-ish, maybe 21. So 8-9 champs competed in that era. He won one. I think he only went to one grand finals, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was just the IW grand finals. I could be wrong on that, but I feel like they fell short more often than they actually
Yeah.
got to the grand finals at champs. But it was never a question of like, is Scump worthy of this praise? Is Scump like an all-time great? If he never won anything, if IW didn't happen, let's say they lose to Envy in the grand finals of IW, which was a very realistic chance of that happening too, because Envy was very good that year. I still think the same exact thing about Scump, that he is one of the greatest players, one of the most talented players, and he deserves to be in whatever the top 5, top 3, however you want to put it. I personally don't think champs rings really defines your legacy. It certainly can help it. Like, I'm not gonna say that like, for example, Shotzi hasn't helped his case as an all-time great the last 2 years, but at the same point, like, because he has 3, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's better than every single player that has 2 rings or 1 ring. That's just kind of how I view these things. And I'm pretty consistent about that in traditional sports. Like, there are certain things like Tom Brady, I think it's just undisputed at this point. I think there was a debate to be had at some point when he had maybe 3 or 4 rings. You could make that, a valid argument of like, well, there are guys like with 2 or 3 that are, about as good. But then when you kind of pile on and he gets, I think, 7 rings, it just, becomes kind of a moot point. Same thing with like basketball and stuff. I think there are valid cases to be had, but I don't know if people really are interested in having their conversations, or more so just kind of, rooting for their favorite player, which is fine. Like, I think that's perfectly valid to be like, our boy Shotzi is the best because he has 3 rings. And I mean, it's kind of it's hard to argue against that in a general conversation. So,
Yeah.
But the GOAT is Clayster, so we don't really need to dive too deep into any of it anyway. Last thing that we didn't talk about second to last thing, I think. Optic Texas, obviously winning CDL champs a few weeks ago. They became the first CDL era team to make a midseason roster change and still win champs. So 2020, the Empire, they just stuck all the way through with that 5-man roster. FaZe had the same roster with bringing in Arcides before the season. The Thieves, Octane Draza, Kenny Envoy, they kept that team. NYSL, Kismet, Hydra, Skies, Priesta, they kept that team. And obviously the last 2 years have been Optic. Before last season, they bring in Pred, they bring in Kenny with Shotzi and Dashi. They win. This year, one of the messiest seasons that I can remember from not only a world champion, but just a really good team. They roll back the same roster as one would expect them to. 2 matches into the season, they drop Pred. After the first major, they drop Hook for Pred. And then after, I believe, the second major, they drop Pred for Hook. They bring in, Skies for Kenny, all that stuff. And they end up bringing Mercules in during the Major 4 qualifiers. And the rest is history. We talk about like the greatest of all time. Like, he has about as good of a start to a career as one can have at 18, 19 years old. So, not going to crown him too early, but certainly a good start for Mercules in that regard. The question Breaking Point put on Twitter, Bink, is, were they the most resilient team in Call of Duty history? Do you think Optic Texas 2025 was the most resilient team ever?
I mean, with the end result, I think you can definitely make the argument there. The only team that really, in comparison, I can think of off the top of my head is that Vanguard NYSL team that kind of like had to win the final tournament, or they had to place really well at the final major
The Crim
to
team.
actually, make it to champs, and then I believe they won. And made it to champs as a result, but that they didn't end up winning champs. So, I just think end of the day, it's definitely at bare minimum, it's very interesting that we never previously had a champs team make a team that won champs make a mid-season roster change, And the first time it happened, the team had 4 different rosters this year or whatever. I always forget the exact number, but we saw a boatload of different iterations of Optic this year. They were able to weather the storm throughout all the troubles of the multiple iterations. They land on their squad once they get Mercules. And now the bigger question is what else they're able to do. Like they have to show up at EWC in order to prove any of the doubters that champs wasn't a one tournament thing, and that would set them up for further success going into 2026. So I think that the bigger element to all this is seeing what we can, what type of Optic we'll get at EWC.
Yeah, I think it's really tough to think because a lot of teams, especially in the old days, would just break up, so you would never really get that comeback arc for a lot of them, or the teams would just change so much in general, or like they would move orgs, so you can't even really kind of tie it to one of them. Yeah, I mean they are certainly the NYSL team that you mentioned with Paul X and Krim, just with how much, especially with how much turmoil we knew about at the time, and then afterward, they probably are the most resilient team in terms of that. Unless Optic comes out and is like, yeah, like Shotzi and Pred got in a fist fight at LAN or something like that, like something ridiculous. Maybe that gets Hoppet. Not a lot of other like in terms of that high level stuff. Like I think this year, just in terms of like how the season went, probably Vancouver had a pretty resilient group in general, like to make the roster change after Major 1, have as strong of a performance or run they did in Major 2, Major 3, but still get swept in those grand finals, how poorly they ended the regular season, and then to come back at champs and have the run they did to go to grand finals. Like they certainly deserve some kind of mention, but when you play a team that went through a lot as well and they beat you, that probably puts Optic over the top. I can't really think of, I'm sure the Frico Impact team was very resilient. Those guys hated each other's guts in certain pockets during that time, and they were very good. Complexity, the Cole Dynasty team, they certainly hated each other's guts at certain points. So maybe they were the most resilient. The Optic Dynasty team, at certain points hated each other's guts. So like there's a lot of times where I think we probably don't know as much about like how the team dynamics worked. And Optic famously was very close to breaking up when they beat Panda Gaming that one year, and then they go on to win champs later that year. So something like that you could probably consider to be relatively resilient. But I'll probably give it to Optic 2025 just by default, or 2022 NYSL. Maybe it's a tie. They share the award, but both of those teams probably deserve a lot of praise. Do you want to hold off on this, the last question on our notes about?
I mean, if you want to talk about it now, we can. But I think EWC has to factor in a little bit.
I did want to bring up this point because it was kind of a lead into EWC in a way, because the conversation was happening on Twitter about who had the best 2025 season. And I think Maven kind of popped off on this a little bit on Twitter, because obviously this was post champs, a few days after the week after champs, and people are saying Optic is the best team in Black Ops 6. And Maven, Maven is not one to, not say things, right? Like he's very open and honest, especially on Twitter. So he says that's kind of convenient for Optic fans, especially, to say Optic is the best team in Black Ops 6 when, Optic did not have a good season whatsoever this year. It just so happened that they won the last event, where in previous years, Optic fans would probably make the opposite argument that, well, we had this great season, we just didn't win champs. That was kind of an Optic staple for years, where they were, they were the Optic dynasty, but they hadn't won champs until IW. So, he's kind of making that argument, and I think it's a really interesting one. And then there were people that were saying, well, what if LAT, for example, wins Esports World Cup? Because they had this horrendous event at champs, but they were the number 1 seed going into champs, and then they win EWC, just like kind of like FaZe what they did last year, where they were the number 1 seed going into champs, they finished top 6, and then they win EWC. So are they the best team in that regard? would Optic, if they, I think if Optic won EWC, like it's like whatever, like they won 2 events, they won the 2 biggest money events for sure. They're the best team probably,
Yeah.
even though the online stuff didn't pan out. But if FaZe or LAT, for example, win another event, that would put them at 3. The next
Yep.
team would be at 2. Optic would be at 1. Granted, Optic won the one that really, really, really matters in terms of legacy. But with that framed, who would you say has had the best 2025 season going into EWC right now?
Yeah. So going into EWC, I would still have to. I said it in our champs previews show that like FaZe won the first 2 events, LAT won the next 2 events, and I was very hopeful that we would get a rematch between those two in the finals of champs, and then that would decide who had the best CDL season in Black Ops 6. Obviously, that didn't happen that way, but we still are in a position where they have 2 tournament wins and Optic only have 1. The other, we're just talking about this when we're talking about the Optic resilience and whatnot. It's been different rosters for Optic. So can you really say that, Optic, well, I guess there are people who would argue the Optic Mercury squad competed at, or no, he competed at
Major
Major
4,
4 too,
yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that what I was about to say there would have been incorrect. But regardless, so Optic has a smaller sample size with Mercules in the roster, but they won champs. Um, how does that compare to 2 tournament wins for Atlanta and FaZe, Atlanta and LAT? And I really, champs again. When we're talking about Shotzi versus Simp, like champs means a lot more
Mm-hmm.
and is very important, but it's still just if we're talking about a season as a whole, I don't know how you can only care about champs from that perspective if you're looking at the entire season because I don't know. It's just the way esports it's not, people will say champs is the Super Bowl of COD or the World Series of COD and stuff, but it's not like it's never felt like it's just, I don't I'm getting mixed up because I don't know. It's a weird one, and I just think EWC is going to help us further determine who had the best season because if LAT or Atlanta wins, I think they get the crown. If Optic win EWC, I think they get the crown because we have 3 teams at 2. But like you said, Optic will have won the highest pedigree tournament and the most prize money. And then if a mystery team wins EWC, I think we're able to just say like the season is a wash in the sense of like there isn't just one team that had the best season because it's divided up in the way that it currently is. So I think that will definitely be a topic we revisit after this tournament.
Yeah, I think it's so FaZe and LAT, I would say, are tied right now. Like they
Yeah.
co-hold that honor at the moment. Optic is not like too far behind. I think they're like just about to nip at FaZe and LAT's heels just because they won champs. So that's kind of like an event and a half, let's say, in terms of like the importance of it. But like you said, if another team outside of those 3 wins EWC, I'd probably just say like in terms of the total season, I guess it maybe depends on how each of these teams perform at EWC as well. But I'd probably just say like FaZe and LAT had the best season, and Optic like won when it really mattered. Like they were the best team when it mattered the most. I guess is how I would say it. Because it just it feels wrong to say that Optic had the best season when I saw them in complete disarray for 75-80% of the year. And then they actually figured it out like that last 15-20% they did it. But I just can't say at this moment in time at least that they're the best team or that they had the best season or they were the best team over the 6 or 7 months that we had during this year.
I mean, I think I might have saw this on Twitter at that time as the Maven thing, but it might just be a mix of potentially seeing something similar and my mind working. But like, it's the '07 New York Football Giants, right? That made it, were a
Yeah.
wild card team, and then they beat the undefeated Patriots.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's probably like the closest real sports comparison that comes to the top of my mind. Do you say that the Giants had a better overall season than the Patriots, who literally only lost one game? It just
Yeah.
turns out that that one game they lost was the Super Bowl. And I think in real sports, there would be a lot of people who say, yeah, we don't care about all those other games. We only care about the Super Bowl. But it's just different in terms of like there's not multiple quote unquote tournaments that lead up to the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
whereas in COD there are, you know, it's not only if it was only online regular season matches and then champs, you could compare it to the Super Bowl, the World Series winner, etc. But because there are actual tournaments that have significant money behind them and mean more than just the quote unquote regular season matches, it's never going to be a one for one comparison to real sports for Super Bowl, World Series, etc.
I think the closest would be the individual sports like tennis and golf, like where golf especially, because you could win a ton of
Okay, yeah.
tournaments and then you
Yeah.
don't win the majors, and then people are like, well, okay, like what does it matter if you win like these, you know, $5 million events, but you can't win the $20 million, you can't win the Masters, et cetera, et cetera. Like Rory McIlroy, for, you know, famously just
Yep,
had to overcome that. So there is some traditional
that's a good
sports,
shout. Yeah.
but in terms of team sports, like there's really not that kind of, because it is, they're not going to have like a postseason, like an after the season kind of championship like EWC. Like that wouldn't make sense to them. I think maybe the closest, like you made a good point with the New York Giants. Another one near and dear to my heart, at least, is 2016, the Cavs. Like the Warriors by far had the better season. Like there's no doubt about that. They literally had the best season in NBA history and got to the finals and then lost in game 7, like in historic fashion. But like, it's pretty hard to say that one team did not have the better season or might even been the better team in that given year, but that doesn't necessarily translate to championships and how it all ends up in the end. So I think there are, you know, some real world examples, but yeah, Call of Duty is unique in this way, at least when compared to traditional sports, that it just, you know, the system and the way that everything is set up in terms of tournaments is completely different than what we see in traditional sports in general. So it'll come down to EWC, and I think that's cool because last year, I don't really think we talked very much at all about that because Optic had like a really good year, all things considered. Like even though they did screw up at Major 4, like then they won champs, and it's like, okay, like that was kind of a blip. This year, it's essentially the inverse. Like they had a horrible season and then they finished really strong and then won champs. So, you know, maybe there's a better argument this year, and we did have 2 teams control the majors throughout the season before champs as well. So that plays a factor as well. But let's talk about EWC. It is a weirder event. It is unlike any other or any CDL event this season. Instead of having, you know, a winner's bracket where 8 teams start in the winner's bracket, 4 teams start in the loser's bracket, EWC is split up like the old Call of Duty events into 4 groups. 4 teams in each group, obviously Group A, B, C, and D, and the top 2 teams, I believe, out of each of these groups will then advance to a playoff bracket, and
single elim, importantly.
yes, a single elim. So unlike what traditional COD people would like out of that, but either way, it does give you a different format, and you know, maybe it could be a sign of, you know, more things to come in terms of the CDL. We did see the minors come in, and they were single elimination brackets, which, you know, it's not great, but it could be better. But I think it'll be interesting nonetheless. The 16 teams competing at this event, most of these teams in the CDL at least are competing under their parent organizations' names. So Optic Texas, for example, is just competing under Optic Gaming, or however they say it. And then G2 Esports, that's Minnesota Rocker, Cloud9 New York, et cetera, et cetera. So Group A is Optic, G2, Cloud9, and 5 Fears, which replaced the Carolina Royal Ravens. in this event because the Carolina Royal Ravens were disqualified for making too many roster changes, reportedly. We talked about it on the last episode, so if you want to go back and listen to that. Group B, Vancouver Surge. Notably not Luminosity, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure if there's a reason for that.
They did it last year.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. 100 Thieves instead of LA Thieves, Gentlemates, of course, instead of LAG Mate, whatever. And then Team Orchid, another challenger team that's competing. That is Group B. Group C, Boston Breach, notably not Oxygen Esports. Movistar Koi, which is the Toronto Ultra, like we said earlier. Team Falcons instead of Vegas Falcons. And Team War is the challengers team in that group. And then Group D, Team Heretics instead of the Miami Heretics. FaZe Clan instead of Atlanta FaZe. Omit instead of, group Project 7 is the last one. So Omit and Project 7, Group D has two challengers teams in this. I'm trying to remember exactly. So I think Five Fears got bumped up into another group, right? Because Five Fears should be in this group, if I'm not mistaken, because
Did it change?
I'm trying to think why there is two challengers teams in this group in particular, and Five Fears isn't one of them. That's kind of what I'm getting stumbled on, but I don't think it really matters all that much. Omit and Project 7, those are the last two challengers teams.
It's the seeding, because that group, like Optic would be the 1 seed, so it would be 1, 8, 9, 16.
Okay, yeah,
you know what I mean? Then,
yeah.
Then the other group would be 2, 15, 7, 9 or 7, 10.
Yeah. Okay. So, but yeah, Group D, Team Heretics, FaZe Clan, Omit, and Project 7. So some interesting groups. I think probably Group B is the toughest if I'm just looking at how this is shaking out. We don't really know what to expect out of Gentlemates. I'm not expecting a ton out of Team Orchid, but I do not watch challengers, so maybe don't take my word at maybe take it with a grain of salt or whatever. But Vancouver and the Thieves being in the same group is very interesting. Could be really spicy there, especially considering Vancouver finished the season very strong, but they also famously did not beat LAT at all this year, and LAT was like 5-0 against Vancouver throughout the year.
Well, they didn't beat them until champs.
Yeah, until champs. And like Scrap said, this is like, almost as important as champs apparently. So yeah. We'll see how that works out. But I think Group C is probably the easiest group. Like I texted you, I said that Boston group ... because of course Toronto's in this group, and I think they finished 3rd in the regular season standings, so they had a really good year, all things considered. That being said, though, they did not have a good champs. Boston had a great champs, had their best event of the entire season, but was very up and down otherwise. The Falcons were the Falcons. They were one of the worst teams in CDL history. Of course, they did make a roster change coming into this, bringing in TJ Haley. So maybe they'll change. Team War, they've been I think Team War in general, that brand has been synonymous with challengers over the last 5 years. They've been very consistent, so I'm not exactly sure what to expect of them, but this seems to be the most wide open group. And the other groups seem to have a pretty clear 1 or 2 teams that's those are the 2 teams that should come out of this group. I have absolutely no clue with Group C how that's going to work out. Where do you want to start for breaking down EWC?
I'll just go real quick for each of these groups, what I'm really thinking. I think Group A is obviously it's Optics to lose, just based on how they played at champs. If that same Optics shows up, they should win Group A, and then it becomes what version of Minnesota / G2 do we get, and how do they stack up against Cloud9? Now that C9 has Gwyn, I'm excited to see Gwyn in with his new roster, whether it is only for EWC or if it is for the future as well. Seeing Gwyn and Sid play together is interesting too. So I really think, not that Five Fears can't make something happen, but G2 versus Cloud9 is the one that sticks out to me in that group. Group B, like you said, it should be Vancouver and 100 Thieves, but really the way things have shaken up, in terms of when if there's an upset and then those two teams end up facing each other, who knows what happens at this point. Um, Admittedly, the thing with Team Orchid to me that I most wanted to see was because Team Orchid is the team that has Beans now. I really wanted to see them play Toronto/Koi. I looked at the way the groups separated into the bracket last year, and it looked like A played B, like 1A played 2B, 2A played 1B, and then C and D. So unless Orchid makes it to the finals and Koi make it to the finals, I don't think we're gonna get Beans versus Toronto, which is a little unfortunate. But there is a world where we get Orchid advancing, and then Beans plays against Mercules again, which that hasn't gone well for him since that whole scenario at Major 3 really first popped up. So yeah, not I do think B is probably the most straightforward group in terms of like I fully expect. I think you could probably say it for D as well, but just we've seen Vancouver and LAT both competing for championships this year, and they've been in finals, and I guess Heretics just haven't gotten to that same level in terms of actually reaching a finals this year. So I'll say B is probably the most straightforward group in my eyes. Then it goes to D, where I expect Heretics and FaZe to advance, especially when they're playing two teams that that they have two challengers teams in their pool, so you would expect them to take care of business there. But then yeah, like you said, Group C is super interesting. Falcons having TJ Halley on that team now, and Kicks, or wow, I said Kicks. We don't know what's going on with Kicks. Xnid going to the flex. That's just interesting in terms of what it means for the options for Falcons next year. But I don't really, expect them to make it to the single elim bracket unless they're able to just pull off an upset over Boston. I you know, we've been in positions before where we both have low expectations for Boston, and then things change, and you start to rally behind them, and I'm still a little skeptical, and in terms of like the pick 'em for the season, it cost me a little bit. So I don't know how I feel about having Boston in a position here where it's like, yeah, maybe they can just win this group and be the best team in Group C. I don't know how much trust I have in them to actually show up and do that. At the same time, the next CDL team for them here is a squad in Koi who's got a guy with Abe playing that we don't really know much about, and Kleenex on the flex. So that is definitely, in my opinion, the most wide open group. And Team War is going into a situation where Linz isn't going to be playing for them. So that also tosses a wrench in terms of, if I had to pick a group where a non-CDL team is able to advance to the bracket, I would probably just go with C, because I'm the least confident in any of those teams really in comparison. But with this Lynn situation and now Coach Bink stepping in, not me, amateur player Bink.
That's not what you said over text message. So don't lie to the
um,
people.
with that change happening, and obviously when it's happening now, like less than a week ahead of the tournament, I don't know how much we can really expect from that squad. But also, again, it feels like C is that wide open group where some craziness could happen.
Yeah, I think Lynn said on Twitter that he said he's not going to EWC because of personal reasons. He said, quote, "on how I've been feeling recently, feels like I forced myself and pushed to play champs, and I need to take a break so I can only be back stronger next year. Disappointing situation for me, and I'm sorry for the team. Good luck, brothers. At official Team War." So best of luck to Lynn's, obviously. At least from what he put it, how he put it, it seems more like burnout and just, needing a break, which he had a really rough season in general. Started in the CDL, a lot of expectations, I would assume, being the only French player on the French team, and then, getting benched and ultimately released at the end of the season. And then, still qualify for challengers, which is an achievement, or not qualify for challengers, qualified for EWC through challengers, which is an achievement by itself. But this has been a long season, I'm sure, for him, and maybe a longer off season will help him get back to where he needs to be. But yeah, I agree. Group C, just completely wide open in that regard. I can't see like a definitive top two here. I think it's notable, at least, that the matchups work out in the CDL team's favor. Like in the two CDL teams that you probably would expect. Like Boston plays War. I would assume Boston is favored in that. Koi will undoubtedly be favored against Falcons. Those are the Group C first round matches. So, if those teams kind of hold, then it'll be Boston versus Koi in the qualifying match. And then the loser of that will play the winner of War Falcons. But none of these things happen the way that we expect them to, as champs really clarified for us. But yeah, I think if you're just going by group, I think the top two that come out of each group, Optic and C9, I would say, like, I think it's gonna be interesting. G2 and C9. I don't really have a lot of faith in 5 years. I don't know anything about them, so that's probably why I don't have any faith in them. But like you, I'm very excited for this new C9 roster, just because Gwen, like, I just want to see how he works out with this team, because Gwen replacing Cap, that's like a massive skill upgrade in my opinion, and I just want to see how much it actually affects them, because they were so disappointing this year. G2 has been kind of up and down, so I have no idea what to really expect of them, but I'm going to say Optic and C9 and Group A coming out of that. Group B, I can't go with anybody else but Surge and 100 Thieves. I think that's probably the clearest, like, at least on paper, but we also saw LAT, lay an egg at champ. So that's a very big if there. Group C, I'll go with Boston and Koi, just because they've been the most consistent this season. But again, that has the makings of a pretty wild group. And then Group D, I think, is pretty clear in terms of FaZe and Heretics. Those teams were very, very good. I know FaZe didn't finish how they wanted to, but I still think that they're one of the better teams and going to be a contender at EWC. I would imagine it's going to be generally the same groups for you.
I'll make sure that it's not all chalk. So I'll go Optic in G2, Group A, Group B, Vancouver, 100 Thieves. Group C, I'll go with Koi and Falcons. I'll just, Koi beats Boston in the winners match. Falcons beat War, and then Boston in the losers qualifying match. And then Group D, Heretics and FaZe. I am excited to see, in a world where there isn't an upset there in Group D, that Heretics versus FaZe match to qualify first, that should be a good one, because we saw some good matches between them, as, Vancouver versus 100 Thieves would be if they both win their first round matchups as well.
Yeah, we have a really good chance of seeing Vancouver versus 100 Thieves and FaZe versus Heretics before we even get to the bracket, which is exciting. And I think Group C will just be such a shit show in general that those matches will be exciting by default. G2C9 is also a really interesting match, probably the most interesting first round match if you're just looking at that. Maybe Koi versus Falcons, because of how different, obviously Abe, just like the intrigue of this rookie coming in and trying to fit, obviously with the role changes there too. That is a massive factor in how that team might play. Falcons, TJ coming in, like when we said it or when we talked about the roster changes on the last episode, I think we both agreed like these were upgrades for these rosters, like at least for Falcons especially. It felt like TJ coming in for Priesta was like, okay, like that makes the Falcons better. How much? That's what we're really going to find out probably pretty soon with that Koi match in the first round. So I'm excited. I think it's going to be an interesting event. The hype is not there. I will say that.
Not for me.
I don't even think from the community it's there, because it's just such a, like, especially because Optic is such a big fan base, and it was just like a release of energy pretty much. Like everybody was like, okay, Optic won, let's go home. Who cares about that EWC crap? Like Optic did it. If Optic maybe had finished second or third and were kind of like, seemed like they were still ascending and they were still getting better and there was like a little more room to grow at the top, I think there would be more excitement generally in the community. But now that they won, like it's just like anticlimactic now. Like I think people are just like, all right, like who really cares about this EWC stuff, which is not the way that you really want it to go. But unless they change unless EWC became like an MSI kind of deal, which is they'd have to completely rejigger the schedule to really fit that if it was to be like an MSI thing. But like that's probably the only way they could really do, or like a preseason event. Like, but again, they would have to really try to move the schedule around to make something that happens in July and make it like a preseason event. So, we'll see what happens, but I think it's gonna be interesting. Who do you have ultimately winning EWC? Again, it's going to be the top 2 teams out of each group, and then it'll be an 8-team single elimination bracket the rest of the way. I didn't exactly see where is the grand finals a best of 7, best of 9?
Yeah, it's last year
best of 7.
Phase beat 100 Thieves 4-2, so yeah, best of 7.
So who wins EWC 2025?
I'm going to try and do this real quick. So the way the bracket looked last year was 1A played 2B in the top very first match, and then it was 1D versus 2C. So the winner of Group A and D would play in the semis. Group B and C winner would play in the semis. So that means there's a very realistic chance we get Optic Phase at the same time. I mean, that really sets the stage, I feel like. If B plays C in the semis, that really sets the stage for Thieves or Vancouver Surge to make a run to the finals, especially in single elim. So you know what we were saying earlier, I'm gonna pick Vancouver Surge to win EWC. I think that would be a very fitting end to the Black Ops 6 season. Just we're having this talk about who had the best season, etc. They give us our 4th team. Surge has been to a bunch of grand finals, and they haven't gotten the job done yet. I think, especially in terms of like the magnitude of the event and everyone talking about it, I think that would definitely get some people riled up if Vancouver wins EWC, and then we're having these conversations of who had the best season when multiple teams won tournaments.
I'll go with 100 Thieves. I picked them for I think the majority of the events this year. That seems right. They obviously were the best team the second half of the regular season. Had a bad event at Champs, but I think of it kind of like Major 2, where they had a bad performance and then they came back and they seemed to be kind of on par with where we thought they would be. I think they're going to be really, really motivated. If I had to guess, like the 2 teams with the most motivation going into this is FaZe and LAT, or 100 Thieves. And those are 2 teams I just don't want to be motivated. I want those teams to be very relaxed and very content with where they are and how they're going to do. Unfortunately for the competition, I think both of those teams, all 8 of those players, have something to prove at this event, which is just not good news for at least Gentlemates and Omit to start out this event. So I'll go with the 100 Thieves. But yeah, I could see really a lot of outcomes here. With how great Vancouver played at Champs, it's very realistic that they win this event, which would be an incredible way to end their season. That like they came up short in so many of these grand finals, and then to finally get it done. And we talked about Optic Phase and 100 Thieves, like how much just for like the total scope of this year and how people would view this season, it would do a lot for them to win this event as well. So going to be really interesting.
It's really the single elim really is a big difference maker here too, because you don't get that second opportunity if you in a world where I was saying like Optic versus FaZe, they match up in the semis, just one of those teams is done, as opposed to at a CDL event they're dropping down to loser bracket and they can make a run back to the finals. Like that's not possible here. So that's where I'm thinking that Group B is most likely where a winner comes from, especially since we have questions about Group C. So, but yeah, I definitely could see a bunch of different teams winning, and I think even with the single elim and the questions around coaching and all that stuff, we're set up for uh, a good tournament that should be a decent show, and most importantly, give us more to talk about heading into the off season.
One last thing, because you said Group C and Group D most likely are going to be in that bottom half, like all together, right? So like groups C, the first team from Group C plays the second team from Group D, for example. Like in the first
Yeah,
round.
so it was one A, the or A1, the first seed from A played uh, the second seed from B in the very top of the bracket. Then the next match in the top half of the bracket was 1D versus
Okay.
2C.
All right. That changes how I was thinking about it, because
so C and D play each
Yeah.
other, but it's not it's not the same.
Okay. Yeah, that makes it a little bit better, because I was just thinking like if Group C and Group D are kind of just half of this bracket, like the bottom half, and then Group A and B are the top half. Like Heretics and FaZe, it's like, okay, which one of you is coming out of the bottom half of this bracket? Like you guys have like a very clear path here. So it really depends on like how you guys figure it out amongst yourselves. But if it's kind of mixed in like that, then that changes the calculus for how this event will go. All things considered, I'm interested, not excited, but interested in how things go, particularly with the coaching changes. EWC also had like a pretty cool setup last year. I'm interested to see how that kind of translates. I know they had like some big like grand opening event, if I'm not mistaken, with like Post Malone doing like their concert and stuff. So it does seem like a really big or a lot of production value. I just don't know how much it's going to translate necessarily to like the community paying attention, getting excited for it. Maybe if Optic does make a run, they really show something here. Maybe that will get people tuned in. Maybe that'll get them interested. If
also
not,
gotta be mindful of the time zone.
Yes, which is not great in general, but nothing you can really do if it's played in Saudi Arabia. So that's the downside. There's $1.8 million on the line, so that is probably the thing, at least for players, to get really excited about. The winning team gets a third of that, so $600,000 to the winners. They also get an automatic qualifying spot at EWC 2026, and then every team gets something here. So like even 13 to 16, they get 20,000 each. 9 through 12 gets 40,000 each. 5 through 8 gets 80,000 each, and then fourth gets 120. Third gets 200. Second gets 320, and of course first gets 600,000. So it'll be interesting, be fun. Hopefully, have some great matches, God willing. Anything else I'm missing?
I think so. I just looked to make sure it's actually not as bad as I thought. Time zone wise, at least the first match on Thursday is Optic versus Five Fears and G2 versus Cloud9. They're both at 8 Eastern, so 7 Central. That'd be 5 Pacific, so not great for the West Coast, but on the East Coast, 8 a.m. isn't the worst.
Yeah, I don't know how many people are getting up at 8 a.m. to watch Five Fears play Call of Duty. But
it's on a Thursday, so people who got their 9 to 5s, they can on their morning commute throw on Optic and catch a match, I guess.
Yeah. I think that about does it. About an hour 15 in. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I think we're at 253 subscribers, something like that. Please subscribe to that YouTube channel if you could. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. And the next show will be sometime this coming week, or not this coming week, sometime after EWC. I don't think it really makes a ton of sense to do a show before EWC if we just did the preview for it. But EWC starts on July 24th. That is, like Bink just said, a Thursday. It runs through the weekend, so we might do something on Sunday. If not, we'll try to do something mid next week to kind of break down EWC, kind of wrap up the CDL EWC Call of Duty competitive season. I don't know how they really frame it. I know EWC is like technically a part of CDL or whatever, but at least the competitive calendar will be done with, and I think we'll see even more roster changes starting next week, or at least the murmurings of roster changes starting next week, which is exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support all throughout this year and even recently. Really appreciate it. One final event here, EWC, then the Black Ops 6 competitive season, as far as we know, is done and dusted. So, um, yeah, after that, we enter the off season, and like Preston said, we could get some early reports and on roster moves and whatnot. But exciting period or exciting time coming up even after this event, where anything can happen really. And the only thing that means is just from a schedule standpoint for the Ego Chall podcast, it's a little bit up in the air. So as Preston always says, make sure you guys follow on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube and whatnot to stay as up to date as possible for when we will possibly be going live with the next show. And yeah, other than that, hope everyone enjoys EWC. Hope we have some banger matches to talk about whenever we do end up going live again. And until then, remember to send the chall.